Teachers of Reddit, what's the most interesting thing a child has brought in for show and tell? Not a teacher, but in junior high we had to do a presentation on a family member. A girl in my class did hers on her grandfather Richard D. Winters. She literally filled an entire poster board with just the medals and badges Winter received during his time in the service. At the time I hadn't heard of Band Brothers, but my teacher was huge fan and was freaking out during the whole presentation. Not the teacher, but in second grade, I forgot to bring an item for show and tell. I had a somewhat loose tooth, so I excused myself to the bathroom, casually ripped out the tooth with my fingers, walked back and showed it off to the class. My mother was called. Not a teacher, but we had a kid bring a military-grade smoke bomb of some sort into my high school once for some class project. He thought it was a dud. All I remember is a whole shit ton of red smoke and then everyone going home early. I teach online school to second graders. One day during live chat, a little girl brought her dog swaddled in blankets. When it came her time to share, she held the dog up to the camera and said, "This is Sparkles. She is 2 months old and died right before chat started." My student brought her dead dog to chat. There were 11 other kids in the chat room that all saw this. A dryer sheet. He even passed it around for the class to smell it. One of my professors told me that when he was in first grade a kid in his class got his toe cut off in a lawnmower accident. The kid brought in his toe in a jar for show and tell. I had one little guy bring in rocks and fossils to my class. Teacher here. Now, I love that stuff, too, so I bring in pieces from my collection as well. It started with bits of obsidian, amethyst chunks, local mollusks and shale, and it went back and forth for several weeks. We even traded a few pieces. I'm friends with his parents, and they were cool with it. Then I brought in a big, complete fish fossil from a local river, complete with sparkling scales. He thought that was cool. Then he brought in a complete fossilized beehive. I was gobsmacked. I didn't even know this was possible. His parents and I contacted the local museum, and that fossil is now on public display. It is the finest of its kind found in British Columbia, and the kid dug it up on his grandparents' farm. By far the most interesting thing I ever received was a mummified foot that a student's father had found in the desert. It showed up on my desk completely unannounced and unmarked. I can't even begin to tell you how jarring it is to open a cardboard box to find a human foot inside. I can tell an interesting story. My youngest sister is adopted from China. We have a cousin, white like the rest of us, that's a model and at this point was in a lot of magazines like Cosmo, Vogue, etc. My sister brought in magazines to show off for show and tell. All the shitty little third grade girls made fun of her, saying that the girl in the magazines wasn't her cousin because of the white Chinese thing. The next time it was my sister's turn, she brought in our cousin in the flesh with a bigger stack of magazines. Checkmate, bitches. When I was younger, my sister got my grandparents to bring a miniature horse to the school for show and tell. Mind you, they had to drive 3-5 hours to do it, and the horse rode in the back seat all the way there and all the way home. I think she won the award for coolest show and tell that day. A kid in a couple years lower than me had a dad that was a banker. He brought in some cool play money and even handed some out to kids, including me. When I showed my play money note to my parents, they were shocked to find it was actually 2 $100 bills. I'm from the UK. A letter from the school went out to all the parents asking them to bring it back to school. Imagine that kid was in a shitload of trouble. A bit difficult, but we had a pet day at school and most people just brought their cats and dogs. At lunch we did a big show where people with pets walked around in a large circle. I remember hysterically laughing cause this one girl brought her pet fish and was trying to walk with it. We were probably about 6 or 7 at the time, so she was really struggling with the thing and trying to walk without sloshing the water. Props to her though, she loved her fish. Edit: no, I'm not from the States, I'm from New Zealand. As a kindergartner, I once brought a homing pigeon to show and tell. The class tied a note to its leg and we released the bird. The next day for show and tell, I brought the note. A child's trekking stick made out of a human femur. Legit. Despite the legality of using human remains being in question, and some serious side-eye from me all year during conferences, the story of how he acquired it was quite interesting. Apparently, it was a family heirloom and the kid's great-great-grandson dug it up from his backyard in rural Virginia back in the early 1800s and named it, no joke, Lemuel. My son was assigned to bring his favorite book one day. Well, he was absolutely fascinated with the phone book that recently came. Took it to school, later learned every teacher heard about internet generation kid who loves the phone book. Not a teacher, but my cousin brought me in for her show and tell item once. She was 5 and I was 1, so I don't remember it, but apparently her classmates really liked me. Not a teacher, but I remember a student brought in a sword, which he claimed his grandfather took off of a Japanese airplane that he shot down during the war. I don't think his parents knew he took it. When I was in kindergarten we did show and tell by the letters of the alphabet. I'd how others did it, so when we get to W I brought my dad. His name is Wes. I grew up around horses, so when we were on H my dad brought a horse for us to pet. The town I lived in was really small, so it wasn't the weirdest thing. A first grader brought the book Go the Fuck to Sleep. I'm not a teacher, but when I was in elementary school I brought in my pet squirrel. My dad had a schedule in which he was off work that day, so he brought her to the school for me in her harness and leash. I had a kid in grade 1 bring in his sock. He said it was smelly and used it for training to cope with bad smells. 17 5-year-olds rolled on the floor in hysterics. Best show and tell ever. Taught at a rural Canadian school last year. Kid in grade 6 brought in pictures of a hunt he went on with his old man. One picture was of this little 4-foot boy holding a severed deer head. "Check this shit out," was what he said to his friends as soon as he arrived that morning. Edit thought I responded but had shitty Wi-Fi. To answer the common question, nah, I didn't let him show the class. I had trembling post-war flashbacks to when I showed them Food Incorporated. And half the class threw up or pretended to. Told the little man no way. In elementary school, 1991-ish, I brought in a jar of mercury my grandfather got from working in a steel mill. The school didn't like that. My parents got it back. My old secondary school tutor told us that when she did her training they had a show and tell day and a kid brought in a shark tooth necklace and said they were from real sharks his uncle had killed while away. He passed the necklace around and while talking one of the other kids went, "If these are from a real shark, why do they say made in China on the back?" The other kid, without missing a beat, went, "They were Chinese sharks. Duh." I wasn't the teacher in this case, but a guy brought in a slave collar from before the Civil War. This was a history class, and we were discussing the early 1800s. We had all learned about slavery, of course, but seeing a thick iron collar and chain that were meant to be placed around the neck of a human being so they could be sold as property. To this day, it's the only thing I've ever seen that just felt evil. Someone brought air in a bag from his room. He opened it and tried to get everyone to smell it. He told everyone afterwards it was just a fart and everyone just lost it. Had a student who wanted to bring in a dummy hand grenade. He was somewhere on the spectrum and was super into military history and he could not understand why he couldn't bring it into school. It had no explosives but was 100% accurate in every other way. To be fair, I had trouble understanding why he couldn't bring it in. My best friend in the 3rd grade went up and presented the teacher. He said, "This is Mr. Teacher, he's very old and likes to eat carrots." He promptly sat down with a look of triumph. I took a sword in once. Wrapped up nicely and secretly. My parents had no idea and my teacher was very shocked when I swung that out. I can still remember the look on her face. Edit: a lot of you seem to think that this is made up based on that other comment from the student in this thread. It's not. This sword was a cutlass, not a katana, and as far as I'm concerned it doesn't share the same origin. Although, in fairness, they could have mistaken it for a katana as we only saw the blade, and although I don't remember, I could have easily lied about the origin. Maybe we really are telling two sides of the same story. Anyway, if that person is here again. Any chance it was in the UK, during Year 5 show and tell with Mrs. Carrick? Not a teacher, but I brought in my new puppy in Year 2. I was so excited for all my friends to meet her, and my mum, being as amazing as she is, decided to ask the teacher and sort it out so it could happen. She held my dog in her lap while the other children went one by one and petted her. For weeks I was the coolest kid in class and I felt so proud to have such a cool mum and cute puppy. What I didn't know at the time, however, was that one of my friends' mum had just died of cancer. My mum was kind enough to try and cheer this little boy up without singling him out and making him embarrassed. I still live with my mum and dog and I love them both more every day. Edit: the pupper in question, as some have been asking. She's called Jasmine and she's still a very good girl. I was in grade 12 bio when we had a two-bodied pig born in the barn, 1 nose, 2 eyes, 4 ears and everything further back doubled. I brought it into class and caused quite the stir. According to my 8-year younger brother, the teacher still talks about how awesome it was to see. One of my kindergarten students brought in a legit set of Russian Matryoshka dolls. Every time she opened one and there was another inside, everyone in the room lost their shit. Every time. Goddamn, most hilarious show and tell I can remember, lol. Edit. Someone pointed out the correct word, which is not babushka. Not a teacher, but my mom is and has wonderful stories. One of my favorites is this kid that forgot to bring something to show and tell. Instead of panicking, he just pretended to hold something about a foot big in his hands and presented his invisible car. I'm talking describing the structure of the car, where he got it. It was some basic store like Walmart or something, I can't remember, and how he liked to play with it. He even took extra care to carry it back and put it carefully on his desk, moving it a bit to the side so he could access his coloring sheet, just to have fun. My mom asked him about it a few days later and he goes, "Oh, that? Yeah, I got bored with it so I gave it away." What a neat way to wrap up his story. Kids are crazy creative. My wife had someone bring a potato. They were poor and thought it was cool. I'm not a school teacher, but a leader for a program in a church. Stuffed animal night. Some little boy brought in a devil plush toy that said "I love you" in a creepy voice. I worked with the 3-5-year-olds. Out of the 16 there that night, 15 left crying and 1 left laughing. When I was in elementary school, my great-grandmother brought in her husband's military medals from his time in service during World War II. She sat with the class and explained all about his service and what each medal ribbon represented. Close to 30 years later, and I still remember her sitting up front talking to us. Not a teacher but a student. To preface this, my family tends to have macabre humor, even when I was young. For show and tell, one day I brought in a story. The night before, my mom and dad were in the garage building shelves with big rubber mallets. I walked into the room and asked, "What's all that banging?" To which my dad, 10 feet away from my mom, started shaking the mallet at her and said, "Oh, I'm beating your mother." Suddenly the head of the mallet flew across the room and hit her square in the face, breaking her nose. But that's not what my class heard. They heard the story of how my dad was beating my mother with a rubber mallet and broke her nose. This resulted in some fun trips to the school counselor and a visit from CPS. Why did I tell the story to my class? In all the commotion, I never got a toy for show and tell, and that's all I had on hand. It was a fun time on all sides. This one guy I know brought in a limited edition Ultra Lord action figure. 7 weeks in a row. Their mother's science set. Which, apparently, is what a child, at only 7 years of life, will call a pipe and other drug paraphernalia. It took social services all but 2 hours to have the child removed. Now, a few months down the line, I'm learning they have already been housed with a few foster families, but it never works out. A truly lovely but troubled child. Not a teacher, but my favorite memory of show and tell. When I was in kindergarten, the first time we had show and tell, I bought in my favorite stuffed animal. Think on of the late 80s cartoons, it was one of those. Sitting in the classroom circle, I remember looking across and seeing the exact same toy being held by another little girl. We were so excited about it. She became my best friend and still is today, all because of a crazy stuffed animal. My dad found these opium bottles from the Canadian Pacific Railroad and he took it home telling me it was over 100 years old. My 9-year-old brain took it to school and we got a call. I was the student. In grade 1 or 2 I brought a skinned rabbit face in for show and tell. My aunt from Newfoundland sent it to me in the mail cause I guess they eat rabbits. I think this was close to Easter, which was most likely the reason she sent it then. Didn't realize how creepy that would have been for my teacher. Obligatory not a teacher. I brought in my great-uncle when I was in kindergarten. He fought in World War II and was an anti-aircraft gunner. He had a shell explode near him and had huge shrapnel scars on his legs that he showed off. I explained about bombs and debris and he told stories about his time with the Canadian Army and lying about his age to go fight. My teacher thought it was pretty morose and that we were a bit young to discuss war, but I think he did a good job of explaining things on a level 5-year-olds could understand. Not a teacher, but my little brother once made a rocket out of tampons glued to a stick and took it to school. The teacher called my mom and told her all about the rocket. He was in 1st grade, so the rocket was not a school threat, but it was just funny. Also, he once took a bag of grass to school and the school called and asked what his intentions were. He told the teacher that he likes dealing with the weeds with Dad. In all reality, he liked helping Dad garden and liked mowing the yard with his toy mower next to Dad. Not a teacher, but in 3rd grade I had a bunch of baby chicks hatched. I think I originally brought in a toy, but then my grandpa came by to drop off my lunch. I had forgotten right when it was my turn to show and tell. My grandpa had brought in a runt baby chick he was keeping warm in his coat pocket, and instead of the toy I decided the little chick would be my show and tell for the week. My teacher loved it. The kids loved it, my grandpa loved it. It was great. Not a teacher but a kid at a school local to me bought in a deactivated stun grenade. Teachers bought the army in, kids were evacuated. My son feels his rock collection is no longer interesting enough. In 1st grade the bad kid in my class brought in his pet snake. In the front zipper pocket of his backpack. I brought in pictures of my family vacation to the World Trade Center for a kindergarten show and tell that was on 9/10/2001. Not a teacher but I was the student with the most interesting show and tell piece. My father was an elephant keeper at the time, he was for 27 years up until 2012. He had many fascinating elephant-related things. He had the Tuscan tooth of one elephant, lost naturally off course, which I took for one show and tell once. I was the cool kid with the cool dad for a long time lol. Edit my most upvoted comment he so thought I'd share some pics of my old man doing his thing.